A scorching afternoon in Boston, on a busy street near Beacon Hill, the sleek black Maybach of Vincent Blackwell rolled slowly through the flow of traffic. Inside the car, the 37-year-old man, a Mafia king feared throughout the city, was completely lost in a storm of tangled thoughts. The message Natasha had just sent still echoed in his mind. She said she was pregnant. I am about to become a father, Vincent thought. But strangely, instead of the joy he had always imagined, an invisible weight pressed tightly against his chest. His heart felt heavy, as if something was terribly wrong, even though he could not quite put a name to it. This arranged marriage was nothing but a power transaction, a cold alliance between two crime families. There was no love, only calculated moves and dangerous secrets. At that exact moment, under the blazing afternoon sun, a small girl suddenly darted across the sidewalk directly in front of the car. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her small frame so thin it seemed like the wind could blow her away. In her hands, she clutched a hastily folded piece of paper and a few loose coins, gripped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. And then, as the sunlight struck just right, a faint glimmer flashed before Vincent's eyes. Around the girl's neck was a platinum chain with a pendant. Vincent's heart seemed to stutter in that instant. "Stop the car," he commanded, his voice so sharp it cut through the silence like a blade. The driver, Roman Castellano, jolted and slammed on the brakes. "Sir, what is going on?" But Vincent did not wait to hear the rest. He pushed open the car door, stepped into the street, and moved after the girl with the predatory grace of a man who had spent his life hunting in shadows. "Hey, sweetheart, wait a second," he called, forcing his voice to stay gentle, though gentleness was foreign to a man like him. The girl slowed and turned her head. Her wide eyes, soaked with tears, looked up at the unfamiliar man standing in front of her, breathing controlled but intense. And in that very moment, Vincent saw it clearly. The platinum chain around her neck, the familiar crest delicately engraved on the pendant, the Blackwell family emblem. The world seemed to collapse beneath his feet. It was his family heirloom, the chain he had lost 6 years ago, the chain he had searched for ruthlessly, ordering his men to tear the city apart, before finally being forced to accept that it was gone forever. Vincent's voice dropped low and dangerous, barely above a whisper. "Where did you get that chain?" The girl immediately stepped back, clutching the pendant tightly to her chest as if afraid someone might steal it from her. "Do not touch it," she said, her voice shaking but fierce, with a courage that seemed impossible for someone so small. "This is my daddy's chain." Vincent froze. Your daddy?" he whispered, his throat dry and burning like he had swallowed broken glass. And in that very moment, everything, the empire he had built, the enemies he had crushed, the blood on his hands, none of it mattered. Because standing before him was a child, a 5-year-old girl wearing his family crest, claiming it belonged to her father, a father she had never met. If you have followed the story this far, hit the like button, share this with someone who loves a good story, and subscribe so you will not miss what comes next. Because from this moment on, the life of Boston's most ruthless mafia king will never be the same again. How did that family heirloom end up around the neck of a starving child in the slums? And the woman behind the words, "my daddy," who is she? And what happened 6 years ago in the darkness of that fateful night? Vincent looked at the child standing in front of him, a little girl so thin that the bones of her shoulders pressed sharply beneath her torn shirt, her large round eyes still wet with tears, yet lit by the hard resilience of a child who had learned the meaning of suffering far too early in life. "What is your name?" Vincent asked, his voice softening in a way that surprised even himself, as if he did not recognize the change as it happened. "Lily," the girl answered, still clutching the necklace tightly against her chest. "Lily Holloway." "Where is your father?" Vincent continued, forcing himself to restrain the chaos churning inside his heart. "Mama said Papa died before I was born," Lily replied, her voice sinking lower. "But Mama said Papa left this necklace for me, so I have to keep it very safe." It felt as though someone had driven a brutal fist straight into Vincent's chest. "Where is your mother?" he asked. "Mama is sick," Lily said, her eyes filling again. "Mama is very hot. I went to ask for money to buy medicine for her." She opened her tiny palm, revealing only a few loose coins, not even enough to buy a bottle of water. Vincent stood still for a second, then turned to Roman by the car. "Follow the girl," he ordered. Lily led them away from the busy streets of Beacon Hill, past buildings that grew older and more decayed, through alleys that sank deeper into shadow, until they reached South Boston, a place where even sunlight seemed reluctant to linger. Vincent's glossy black Maybach looked painfully out of place among damp-stained walls, towering piles of trash, and people sitting slumped on the sidewalks with hollow eyes. Lily stopped in front of a crumbling building, its rotting wooden stairs groaning under every step. She climbed to the 3rd floor, pushed open a warped door, and went inside. Vincent followed, and the moment he saw the room, a sensation he had never known in all his 37 years surged through his chest. The room was barely 200 square feet, its walls split by deep cracks, mold spreading in grotesque patterns across every surface. An old single bed with a yellowed white sheet was pressed against the corner. A small electric burner sat abandoned beside a window sealed with cardboard. There was no refrigerator, no air conditioner, nothing to suggest this was a place fit for human life, and on that bed lay a motionless woman. "Mama, I am back." Lily ran to the bedside, her tiny hand touching the woman's forehead. "Mama, there is an uncle here to see you." Vincent stepped closer. The woman was so thin her cheekbones jutted sharply, her skin pale as if drained of blood, long black hair plastered to the pillow with sweat. She was trembling, her breathing heavy and rapid, clearly burning with a dangerously high fever. Beside the bed sat a plastic bowl of cold water and a small cloth. Vincent looked around the room. No medicine, no food, only a few packets of cheap instant noodles and a nearly empty plastic jug of water. He looked down at his leather shoes that cost as much as an entire year of rent for this room. He looked at the watch on his wrist, a watch that could have sustained this mother and child for 10 years. Then he looked back at the woman lying there, the woman who had raised a child wearing the Blackwell family necklace alone for 5 years inside this hell of a room. "Who is she?" Vincent whispered, his voice rough and strained. Roman stepped closer, examined the woman, then looked at Lily, his expression grave. "Sir," Roman said quietly, "I think we need to take her to the hospital immediately. This is very dangerous." Vincent nodded without taking his eyes off the woman's face. In his mind, thousands of questions spun like a storm. Who was she? Why did she have his necklace? Why had she told her daughter it belonged to her father? And this child, this 5-year-old with her wide eyes and extraordinary courage, could she truly be his blood? Vincent bent down and gently placed his hand on the woman's forehead. It burned like fire. She needed treatment at once. "Carry her to the car," Vincent ordered, his voice returning to its familiar cold authority. Yet in his dark eyes something had shifted, something he could not name. Roman stepped forward and lifted the woman as if she weighed no more than a dry leaf. She was so light she seemed almost weightless. Lily clutched Vincent's hand, her eyes lifted to his with fear tangled with hope. "Can you save my mama?" she asked, her voice trembling. Vincent looked down at the child, into those eyes, and in that moment the most ruthless mafia boss in Boston found himself unable to speak. He only nodded, then led Lily down the decaying staircase, leaving behind the 200-square-foot room that had held 5 years of hell for a mother and her child. The Maybach tore through the streets of Boston at blistering speed, Roman in the driver's seat while Vincent sat in the back with Lily and the unconscious woman, having already called the Blackwell family's private physician and ordered everything prepared at the estate instead of going to a hospital, because he did not want anyone to know about this until he uncovered the truth. The woman lay there with her head resting against the leather seat, her breathing still heavy and uneven, a faint moan slipping from her lips now and then as she drifted in and out of fevered delirium. Lily sat beside her mother, her tiny hand gripping her mother's hand without letting go, her eyes red and swollen but no longer crying, as if her tears had been exhausted long ago. Vincent watched the two of them in silence, his mind struggling to piece together fragments that refused to align. When the car stopped at the gates of the Blackwell estate, Dr. Harrison was already waiting with 2 nurses. They carried the woman to a room on the 2nd floor, started intravenous fluids, brought the fever down, and began a full examination. Vincent stood in the hallway while Lily sat on the bench nearby, her small feet unable to reach the floor, swinging back and forth with anxious restlessness. Nearly 2 hours passed before Dr. Harrison stepped out, his expression grave. "She has a high fever caused by a lung infection," the doctor said, "combined with severe malnutrition and extreme exhaustion. If she had not been brought here in time, she might not have survived the night." Vincent said nothing, only nodded and went into the room. The spacious room glowed with soft golden light, the woman lying on a large bed with pristine white sheets, an intravenous line attached to her thin arm. She was still asleep, but her breathing was steadier now, her face no longer contorted with pain. Vincent pulled a chair closer and sat down, studying her face, searching for some memory, some image from 6 years earlier. But there was nothing. That night he had been too drunk, too shattered by Marcus's betrayal, remembering nothing but darkness and emptiness. About an hour later, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering before slowly opening. At first, she stared at the ceiling in confusion, as if she did not understand where she was. Then her gaze shifted to the side, and the moment she saw Vincent, her entire body reacted as if struck by electricity. She tried to sit up, but her weakened body allowed only a slight lift before she fell back onto the pillow. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from days without enough water. "Who are you, and where am I? Where is Lily? Where is my daughter?" "Stay calm," Vincent said, his voice low and deliberate. "Your daughter is right outside. She is safe." But she could not calm down. She tried again to rise, panic filling her eyes as she scanned the unfamiliar room. "Lily," she called weakly yet desperately. "Lily, where are you?" The door flew open, and Lily rushed in like a small gust of wind. "Mama," the little girl cried as she climbed onto the bed and wrapped her arms around her mother. "Mama, you are awake. Mama, I was so scared." Sarah, that was her name, held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks, kissing Lily's hair, kissing her forehead, as if afraid this was only a dream and the child might vanish at any moment. Then Sarah looked up and met Vincent's gaze, and immediately she pulled Lily behind her, shielding her with her frail body. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice still trembling but edged now with a fragile defiance. "What do you want from us?" Vincent did not answer at once. He stood, stepped closer to the bed, and stopped at a distance that would not frighten her further. "The necklace," he said, his voice low and clear. "The necklace around your daughter's neck. Where did you get it?" Sarah blinked, her hand instinctively moving to Lily's chest where the platinum necklace still rested. "I found it," she said, her voice sinking as if recalling something painful. 6 years ago, in a hotel room." "Which room?" Vincent asked, his body taut as a drawn wire. "The Meridian Grand," Sarah replied. "I worked there. One night I wandered into a VIP room and fell asleep, and when I woke up the next morning I found this necklace on the floor." It felt as though all the air had been sucked from Vincent's lungs. The Meridian Grand, 6 years ago, a VIP room. That was where he had been that night, the night Marcus betrayed him, the night he drank until memory abandoned him. "Was there anything else?" Vincent asked, his voice rough. "Did anything else happen that night?" Sarah was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the bed. Then she looked up and met Vincent's gaze with a pain-filled resignation he had never seen in anyone before. "I do not remember clearly," she said softly. "I only know that after that night I was pregnant with Lily." The room fell into a crushing silence. Vincent stood like stone, his dark eyes fixed on the woman before him, then dropping to the child pressed against her mother with wide, bewildered eyes. 6 years. He had a 5-year-old daughter living in the worst slums of Boston while he sat on the throne of a shadow empire, and this woman, frail and hollow-eyed, had carried everything alone for 6 years without ever knowing who he was. Sarah Holloway was 21 years old, a young woman who possessed nothing but pain and an unyielding will to survive, knowing nothing of who her parents were, having no photograph, no letter, no trace to prove that she had ever been loved by anyone. Sarah had been found in a trash bin behind a hospital when she was only a few days old, wrapped in a torn old cloth, crying weakly in the freezing Boston winter night. She was taken to St. Margaret Orphanage on the outskirts of the city, a place she would later understand was not a refuge but a living hell. From the outside, St. Margaret appeared to be a respectable charitable institution, yet behind its walls lived indifference, violence, and dark secrets no child dared to speak of. Sarah remembered winter nights without enough blankets, meals of thin porridge and hard stale bread, and beatings delivered for the smallest mistakes. The orphanage director, a heavy-set woman with eyes cold as coins, frequently starved disobedient children and locked them in a dark basement cell for days at a time. Sarah had been in that cellar countless times, curled into herself in the darkness, listening to rats scurrying around her, whispering to herself that she would survive, that she had to survive. But the worst cruelty was not hunger or beatings. When Sarah turned 12, one of the male staff members began to look at her in ways that made her skin crawl. He found excuses to call her into private rooms, at first brushing her hand as if by accident, then growing bolder. Sarah fought back, scratching, biting, kicking, doing everything she could to escape those filthy hands. She ran to the director to report him, But instead of protection, she received a slap across the face and 3 days locked in the cellar for slander. From that moment, Sarah learned a brutal truth. No one in this world would save her. She could only save herself. She learned how to become invisible, how to avoid notice, how to sleep with a small knife hidden beneath her pillow, stolen quietly from the kitchen. At 18, Sarah left St. Margaret with exactly 1 set of clothes on her back and $20 in her pocket, everything she owned after 18 years of life. She had no education, no skills, no family, nowhere to go. The next 3 years became another form of hell, different in shape but no less cruel. Sarah worked every job she could find, washing dishes in restaurants, cleaning cheap hotels, handing out flyers on the street, working retail in small shops. She was cheated out of wages so many times she lost count, employers seeing a young woman with no protection as easy prey. Once she worked 2 full months in a laundromat only to arrive on payday and find the shop closed and the owner gone with everyone's money. Another time a man promised her a cheap room, but when she arrived she realized he wanted something else in exchange, and Sarah fled that house in the middle of the night with torn shoes and not a single cent. She slept on the streets, in parks, in subway stations, curling into dark corners, trying to become invisible so no one would bother her. She was so hungry she searched trash bins for leftover food, so cold she believed she might freeze to death on a Boston sidewalk. But Sarah did not collapse. In the darkest nights, lying curled in some alley with an empty stomach and a body trembling from cold, she kept telling herself that tomorrow would be different, tomorrow she would find a way, tomorrow her life would change. And that tomorrow arrived in the form of a short-haired girl with blue-dyed hair named Margot Chen. Sarah met Margot in a small cafe in the South End, while trying to ask for a dishwashing job. Margot worked the night shift as a bartender at a city club, 23 years old, fierce in personality with a warm heart hidden beneath a rough exterior. Margot looked at Sarah, at the eyes worn down but unbroken, at the tattered clothes and the hunger-thinned frame, and said a sentence Sarah would never forget. "You look like you are about to starve to death. Come with me. I have a place." Margot's room was only 20 square meters in an old apartment building in the South End. But to Sarah, it was paradise. For the first time in her life, she had a bed to sleep in, a roof over her head, someone willing to share every bite of food and every sip of water. Margot did not ask much about Sarah's past. She only said she did not care where Sarah came from, only where she was going. The 2 young women lived together, sharing rent, sharing food, sharing nights of tears when life felt unbearable, and rare moments of laughter when they found small scraps of joy. Margot worked nights. Sarah worked days, taking turns using the single narrow bed in the room. Life remained difficult and scarce, but for the first time Sarah no longer felt alone. Then one November morning, as Sarah prepared to go out looking for work, her phone rang. On the other end was the Meridian Grand Hotel, a 4-star hotel located directly above the Obsidian nightclub in the Seaport district. They invited her to interview for a housekeeping position. Sarah stared at the phone screen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "This could change my life," she whispered to herself, not knowing that those words were true in a way she could never have imagined. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn fully broke. She dressed in the neatest clothes she owned, a white shirt already slightly yellowed with age, and a pair of black slacks borrowed from Margot because the hem of Sarah's own pants had torn. Then she walked for nearly an hour to save bus fare, crossing the streets of Boston in the biting November cold that cut straight to the bone. Yet inside her chest glowed a small, fragile spark of hope. The Meridian Grand Hotel rose before her like a castle from a fairy tale, its glass facade gleaming in the early sunlight. Gold-plated revolving doors, uniformed staff standing on either side of the entrance, and Sarah took a deep breath, steadying her trembling legs before stepping inside. The interview was conducted by Daniel Whitmore, the housekeeping manager, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and sharp, perceptive eyes softened by genuine kindness, who asked Sarah about her work experience, why she wanted the job, and the hardships she had endured. Sarah did not lie. She spoke of the odd jobs she had done, of her diligence and refusal to give up, of her longing for steady work to build a life, and something in the young woman's eyes made Mr. Whitmore pause. Resilience, honesty, and a deep exhaustion carefully hidden behind calm composure. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded and said, "Miss Holloway, I see a determination in you that not everyone possesses. This job is demanding, and the pay is not high, but if you work hard there will be opportunities to advance. You are hired." Sarah sat there unable to believe her ears, and asked in a trembling voice, "What did you say?" To which he smiled and repeated that she was hired and would begin work the following Monday. Sierra walked out of the Meridian Grand with eyes burning red from holding back tears, managed only a few steps before she collapsed onto a stone bench and sobbed uncontrollably, because for the first time in 21 years of life, someone had looked at her and said she deserved a chance. She ran home so fast she could not remember how long it took, burst into the room where Margot was sleeping after a night shift, shook her awake and cried out that she had been hired and finally had a job, and Margot sprang up, still groggy, then wrapped Sierra in a fierce embrace and shouted with joy that she had known it all along. Margot insisted they celebrate that night, refused to hear any objections about money, declared she would pay, and decided they would go to Obsidian, the club directly beneath the hotel where Sarah was about to work, calling it a way to scout the territory. Sarah hesitated and said she was not used to places like that, but Margot pleaded with shining eyes, telling her she deserved a little happiness after everything she had endured, and in the end Sarah agreed, unaware that this seemingly harmless decision would alter her life completely. That evening, Margot rummaged through their small, shared closet, chose a simple black dress for Sarah, modest yet elegant, while she herself wore a striking red dress meant to stand out in any crowd, and Sarah studied her reflection, seeing a girl unlike the ragged figure who once searched trash bins for food, though the eyes remained the same, still carrying the shadow of long-suffering years. Before leaving, a familiar headache struck, a chronic pain she had endured for years, perhaps from prolonged malnutrition, or the time she had been locked in the orphanage cellar. She never knew the cause because she had never been able to afford a doctor, so she swallowed a strong, cheap painkiller with a quick sip of water while Margot watched with concern, and Sarah assured her it was nothing, just a headache that would pass. They took the bus to the Seaport District, where Obsidian sat directly beneath the Meridian Grand, one of Boston's most famous nightclubs owned by Blackwell Industries, though few knew that behind the corporate name lay the most powerful Mafia empire in the northeastern United States. Inside the club, the music crashed like ocean waves, LED lights in every color sweeping over bodies dancing on the floor, and Margot dragged Sarah to the bar, ordered 2 cocktails, and began to move with the beat. Sarah tried to blend in, took one sip, then another, unaware that the painkiller she had taken earlier would react with alcohol, and about an hour later the world began to spin, sounds fading as if from far away, her legs turning to cotton. She grabbed Margot's hand and slurred that she felt dizzy and needed to lie down, refused to leave, insisted she would just rest for a bit upstairs and come back down, then staggered toward the stairs leading to the hotel above. She did not know where she was going, her body moving as if guided by someone else, the hotel hallway blurring before her eyes, doors sliding past like streaks of color, until she saw one door ajar, darkness and silence inside, stepped in, saw a large bed, and collapsed onto it, sleep pulling her under like a violent tide, leaving her unaware of whose room it was or what fate awaited her on the other side of the night. At that same time, only a few blocks away from Obsidian, Vincent Blackwell, 31 years old, sat alone in his penthouse on the top floor of Blackwell Tower, staring down at the city of Boston at night with hollow eyes, an almost empty glass of whiskey in his hand, and a thick dossier spread across the table before him, filled with numbers and signatures he had been reading and rereading for hours. Marcus Thorne. The name circled endlessly in Vincent's mind like a blade carving into his heart. Marcus Thorne, the financial advisor he had trusted for 10 years, the man he had treated like a brother, the man to whom he had entrusted every hidden transaction of the Blackwell empire, now vanished with $15 million in cash and every secret capable of destroying Vincent and the entire Blackwell family. That morning, when Roman reported that the secret accounts had been drained, Vincent had refused to believe it. He called Marcus, with no answer, sent men to Marcus's house to find it empty, furniture untouched, but no sign of its owner, ordered a citywide search that yielded nothing. Marcus Thorne had disappeared as if he had never existed, leaving behind a vast void and a knife buried deep in Vincent's back. 10 years, Vincent whispered into the darkness, his voice rough with alcohol and pain. 10 years I trusted him as I trusted myself. I told him secrets I never spoke to anyone. I let him touch things even Roman was never allowed to know. And he betrayed me. Vincent hurled the whiskey glass at the wall, the sound of shattering crystal echoing through the vast yet empty room. And though he had killed countless men and crushed innumerable enemies, he had never known pain like this, because enemies could be anticipated, fought, destroyed. But how did one guard against someone they had trusted completely? Vincent's phone rang. Roman on the line. Vincent answered with a voice of ice and said, "Speak." "Sir," Roman replied carefully, "we are still searching for Marcus. I have bad news. He wiped all digital traces. We cannot track him through conventional channels, but I also have good news. One of our men saw him at Logan Airport last night. He has flown to Europe." Vincent was silent for a long moment before he said, "Find him. Wherever he hides in this world, find him. And when you do not kill him. Bring him back to me. I want to deal with him myself." "Yes, sir," Roman answered. "Do you need me to come over?" "No," Vincent said. "Tonight I want to be alone." He ended the call and poured another glass of whiskey. Then another. But the alcohol did nothing to ease the pain. It only blurred it, twisted it into deeper chaos. Vincent stood, staggered to the window, and looked down at the city below. Somewhere out there in Boston, or somewhere across the world, Marcus was laughing at him. $15 million meant nothing to the Blackwell empire. But the secrets Marcus carried, the lists of illicit deals, the names of government partners, the evidence of the family's illegal operations, if those fell into enemy hands or into the police, Vincent would lose everything. "I need to get out of here," Vincent thought, and he called his driver and ordered him to take him to Obsidian. 20 minutes later, Vincent entered Obsidian through the private VIP entrance, bypassing the crowd dancing below, and took his seat at his private bar on the upper level, overlooking the entire dance floor while remaining unseen. He ordered the most expensive whiskey available and drank as if trying to drown himself in it, the staff watching their owner with quiet concern but saying nothing, everyone knowing that when Vincent Blackwell was in this state, the wisest course was distance and prayer. Close to midnight, Vincent was so drunk he could no longer stand. The club manager called Roman, who rushed over immediately, and with 2 bodyguards they lifted Vincent and took him upstairs to the VIP hotel rooms of the Meridian Grand reserved for the Blackwell family, laid him on the bed, turned off the lights, and closed the door. "Rest now, sir," Roman said softly, though he knew Vincent might not hear. "Tomorrow we will find a solution." Roman and the guards left, none of them knowing that barely half an hour earlier a young woman had wandered into this very room and was sleeping deeply on the other side of the large bed, hidden in darkness. And as the door closed, fate finished weaving its web, waiting for 2 lost souls to collide in the night. The room lay submerged in thick, suffocating darkness. Heavy curtains sealed tight, allowing not a single trace of the city's light to slip through. And Sarah lay curled into one corner of the massive bed, her breathing slow and steady in deep sleep, completely unaware that she was in the private room of the most dangerous Mafia boss in Boston. When Roman and the bodyguards brought Vincent inside and laid him down on the bed, none of them noticed Sarah's small form on the opposite side, the bed too wide and the darkness too dense, and they turned off the lights, closed the door, and left, abandoning 2 strangers within the same space without knowing it. Vincent lay there, his mind spinning from alcohol, his body heavy as stone, struggling to open his eyes as if 1,000 weights pressed them shut, and in the hazy state between consciousness and drunken oblivion he sensed warmth beside him, a faint, gentle scent, unlike the harsh reek of whiskey clinging to his skin. He assumed it was one of the women his subordinates sometimes arranged for him, distractions he used to forget the emptiness inside, and he did not ask, did not speak, allowing instinct to guide him through the darkness. Sarah, lost in the delirium of painkillers mixed with alcohol, had no clear awareness of what was happening, drifting as if suspended in warm water, sensing someone beside her, a powerful presence that did not feel threatening, her body responding instinctively while her mind remained buried beneath impenetrable fog. She did not know who the man was, could not see his face, could not hear his voice. There was only darkness and warmth and confusion. That night passed like a dream neither of them wished to remember, or perhaps could not remember, with no words, no light, no conscious consent, only 2 broken and lonely souls reaching for each other in the unconscious dark, awakening the next morning to consequences no one could foresee. When the first pale rays of dawn slipped through a narrow gap between the curtains, Sarah woke first, her head splitting with pain, and it took several seconds for her to realize she was no longer in the small, familiar room she shared with Margot. She looked around and saw a vast, luxurious space, expensive furnishings, deep red velvet curtains, and her heart seemed to stop when she looked down at herself, her clothes disheveled, the black dress from the night before wrinkled and undone, and beside her lay a man still asleep. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. She remembered nothing, not how she had come here, not what had happened during the night, but her body told her the truth. Panic surged like a tidal wave, and she silently slid off the bed, trying not to make a sound, knowing she had to get out, had to run before the man woke, not wanting to know who he was, wanting only to forget everything and pretend the night had never existed. As she searched frantically for her shoes, her foot struck something hard and cold on the floor, and she bent down to pick it up. A platinum necklace with an intricately engraved crest pendant. In the faint dawn light, Sarah could not make out what the emblem was, only that it was beautiful and clearly valuable, and a fleeting thought crossed her mind that it could be evidence, a clue to the man whose face she had never seen. She slipped the necklace into her pocket, unaware that this unconscious act would completely alter her life and the life of the Mafia boss sleeping soundly behind her. Sarah slipped out of the room, ran down the hallway, down the stairs, and burst out of the hotel as if chased by ghosts, calling Margot with a trembling, broken voice. Margot picked her up on a nearby street corner, and seeing her friend's pale face and terrified eyes, asked no questions, only held Sarah tightly and took her home. Sarah did not tell Margot what had happened. She could not speak it aloud, could not face the truth, only said she had been too drunk and fallen asleep somewhere in the hotel, and Margot, though suspicious, did not press her. In the days that followed, Sarah tried to forget that night, throwing herself into her new job at the Meridian Grand, working from morning until night, hoping exhaustion would erase the frightening memory from her mind. She hid the platinum necklace in a small box at the bottom of her bag, afraid to look at it, afraid to think about it, as if not seeing it could make everything unreal. But fate did not allow her to escape so easily. Meanwhile, Vincent woke around midday with a headache that felt ready to split his skull, scanning the room as he tried to piece together the night before, remembering the heavy drinking, the pain of Marcus's betrayal, the presence of someone beside him in the dark, but no face, no voice, nothing concrete. He only knew that when he awoke the bed was empty, and the family necklace he always wore around his neck was gone. Vincent ordered Roman to search, to check security cameras, to track down any clue, but the corridor cameras on the VIP floor had malfunctioned that night, leaving no footage, and no hotel staff had seen any unfamiliar woman come or go. The Blackwell family necklace, an heirloom passed down through generations, had vanished without a trace, along with the mysterious woman whose name and face Vincent never knew. He searched for months afterward, ordered the city turned upside down, but found nothing, and eventually, amid the hunt for Marcus Thorne and the fallout of betrayal, Vincent was forced to accept that the necklace and the woman from that night were lost forever, never knowing that only a few blocks away, in a small room in the South End, a young woman was clutching her stomach and sobbing over a pregnancy test, showing 2 red lines, while the necklace he sought lay hidden in a small box at the bottom of her bag. 2 months after that fateful night, Sarah began to sense that something was wrong with her body, nausea striking every morning, an unusual exhaustion despite sleeping enough, and her period failing to come even though it was nearly 3 weeks late, and she tried to ignore the signs, telling herself it was overwork, irregular meals, stress. But when the symptoms did not fade and only grew worse, Sarah was forced to face her greatest fear. One evening after her shift, she bought a pregnancy test from a nearby pharmacy and hid it in her coat pocket as if it were a ticking bomb, waiting until Margot left for her night shift before taking it out, her hands shaking so badly she had to try 3 times before following the instructions correctly. The 3 minutes of waiting stretched like an eternity, and when Sarah saw 2 red lines appear clearly on the test, it felt as though the ground collapsed beneath her feet. She sank onto the floor of the shared bathroom, hugging her knees and crying until there were no tears left. She was pregnant. Pregnant by a man whose face she did not know, whose name she did not know, from a night she could not remember. She was 21 years old, with no family, no money, having only just secured the first stable job of her life, and now she was pregnant. Sarah thought about ending the pregnancy, searched online for information, looked up clinics, calculated the money she would need, but every time she tried to make that decision, something inside her stopped her. The child was innocent, blameless in what had happened, and this might be the only family Sarah would ever have, a small life carrying her blood. She had lived 21 years alone, unloved and unseen. Could she really take away her own child's chance to live? Sarah decided to keep the baby, not knowing how she would raise it or what the future would hold, only knowing that she would try with everything she had. She told Margot, and the blue-haired girl, instead of blaming or abandoning her, held Sarah tightly and said they would get through it together, telling her through tears that she would not leave her. But reality was far harsher than promises. When Sarah's belly began to grow and could no longer be hidden, The Meridian Grand dismissed her under the excuse of staff reductions. And Sarah knew it was only a pretext. They did not want a pregnant employee tarnishing the image of their luxury hotel. She lost her job in her 5th month of pregnancy with savings that could only cover 1 more month of rent. Margot took extra shifts, extra work, carrying the entire cost of living for both of them, growing more exhausted by the day, yet never complaining, never once blaming Sarah. Guilt kept Sarah awake at night, knowing she had become a burden to the only friend she had, yet having no other choice. She tried to find new work, but no one would hire a woman visibly pregnant and close to giving birth. Sarah went into labor on a sweltering summer night in a public hospital, uninsured, penniless, with no one by her side except Margot. She labored for 18 hours, in pain so intense she thought she might die, while Margot held her hand, cried with her, and begged her not to give up. And when the baby's first cry rang out, when Sarah saw her daughter's tiny flushed face, all the pain seemed to dissolve. She named her Lily, the pure white lily, a symbol of her hope that her child's life would be cleaner and brighter than her own. But hope and reality were not the same. Hospital bills piled up into a crushing debt Sarah had no idea how she would ever repay. She returned to work just 2 weeks after giving birth, her body barely healed, her wounds still raw, taking any job she could find, washing dishes, cleaning, handing out flyers, selling goods, working 3 jobs a day just to afford milk for her baby and pay down debt. Margot helped care for Lily whenever she was not working, the 2 young women taking turns raising the child in their cramped 20-square-meter room. The next 5 years became an unending descent into hell. Sarah worked herself to exhaustion, sometimes eating only 1 meal a day so she could save money to feed Lily. She was cheated out of wages, fired without cause, harassed, treated like trash by employers who knew she had no other options. Once a restaurant manager groped her, and when she resisted, she was fired on the spot and threatened with being blacklisted from work in Boston. Once she worked 2 months at a laundromat only to arrive on payday and discover the owner had vanished with everyone's money. Once Lily developed a high fever in the middle of the night, and with no money to take her to the hospital, Sarah ran through the rain with her child in her arms to the emergency room, dropping to her knees and begging the doctors to save her daughter, promising to pay later even though she had no idea how she ever would. Margot stayed by Sarah's side through those years, but when Lily turned 3, Margot received an opportunity to move to New York for higher-paying work, and Sarah knew her friend had sacrificed too much already. She could not selfishly ask her to stay. "Go," Sarah told Margot, forcing a smile through tears. "You deserve a better life. Lily and I will be fine." Margot cried when she left, promising to send money every month, a promise she kept, but it was never enough. Sarah and Lily moved into a dilapidated 200-square-foot room in the South Boston slums, the cheapest place Sarah could find. She continued working 3 jobs a day, leaving Lily alone in the room while she worked, teaching her 5-year-old daughter to care for herself because she had no other choice. And through all those 5 years, there was one thing Sarah always kept close: the platinum necklace with the crest pendant she had picked up on that fateful night. She never sold it, even in moments of such despair that she considered selling everything she owned, because it was the only thing that connected her daughter to the father she would never know. Sarah put the necklace on Lily when the child turned 3, telling her it belonged to her father, that he had died before she was born but had left the necklace for her. A lie, but the only lie Sarah ever allowed herself to tell, because she could not bring herself to tell her daughter that she did not know who her father was. Returning to the present, after hearing Sarah recount the fateful night 6 years earlier, Vincent stepped out of the room where mother and child were resting and summoned Roman to see him immediately. Standing alone in his private study with dark eyes fixed on the window yet seeing nothing at all, his mind spiraling through thousands of thoughts. The door opened and Roman entered, his expression grave. "Sir, I have reviewed all available records," Roman said, as he placed a thick file on the desk before Vincent. Sarah Holloway, 27 years old, orphaned since infancy, raised at St. Margaret Orphanage. She was hired as housekeeping staff at the Meridian Grand in November, 6 years ago. The timing matches exactly with the night you were there. Vincent flipped through the pages, his eyes skimming lines that chronicled the suffering life of the woman he had just met. The orphanage, abandonment at birth, no relatives, no family, the odd jobs, unpaid wages, years of extreme poverty. Then the entry noting her dismissal from the Meridian Grand while 5 months pregnant, giving birth alone in a public hospital, crushing debt, raising her child in a slum room for 5 years. "The cameras," Vincent asked, his voice low and tight. Was there any footage from that night? Roman shook his head. I rechecked all archived recordings. The VIP floor camera system malfunctioned that night. Nothing was recorded, but employee logs confirm that Sarah Holloway was present at the hotel. She worked the afternoon shift and clocked out at 9 that evening. Obsidian also has no camera coverage of the stairwell leading to the hotel floors. Vincent closed the file and fell silent for a long moment. A DNA test, he said. His voice no longer a command but almost a whisper. I need to know for certain. Roman nodded. I collected the child's saliva when I gave her candy earlier, and your sample came from the glass you drank from. I will send them to the most reliable laboratory. Results will be available within 48 hours. The 2 days of waiting stretched like 2 centuries. Vincent did not leave the estate, did not meet anyone, did not attend to a single matter of business. He only watched the mother and child from a distance, observed Sarah slowly regaining strength under the care of his private physician, watched Lily run and explore the vast mansion with wide eyes full of wonder. Was that child truly his blood? He studied Lily's eyes, searching for resemblance, for proof of connection. And the longer he looked, the more disturbingly familiar those eyes became. Their shape, the way she furrowed her brow when thinking, the crooked smile when she laughed. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Roman knocked on the door of Vincent's study, holding a white envelope. The results are in, Roman said quietly. You should read them yourself. Vincent took the envelope, his hand trembling slightly despite his effort to control it, opened it, pulled out the paper inside, and read. The black printed words on white seemed to dance before his eyes. The probability of a biological father-daughter relationship between Vincent Blackwell and Lily Holloway is 99.9%. Vincent read the line again and again. 99.9%. Nearly absolute. Lily was his biological daughter. He had a 5-year-old daughter, a child who had lived in the hell of poverty for 5 years, while he sat on the throne of a shadow empire, possessing everything money could buy, unaware that his own blood was suffering only a few blocks away. Vincent let the paper fall onto the desk, stood, and walked to the window, looking down at the garden where Lily sat on the new swing he had ordered installed the day before, laughing with Eleanor the housekeeper, her clear laughter floating up to the 2nd floor. His daughter, his blood, the sole heir to the Blackwell empire, and the woman who had given birth to her, the woman who had borne everything alone for 6 years without a single complaint, without once seeking him out even though she possessed the family necklace that could have led her to him at any time. Vincent turned to Roman, his eyes cold as ice but his voice carrying a tone Roman had never heard from his master before, a resolve laced with something almost gentle. From this moment on, Vincent said, Lily and Sarah are to be protected as members of the Blackwell family, and anyone who dares touch them will be dealt with in a way that Boston will never forget. After receiving the test results, Vincent did not wait a single second. He took the DNA report in his hand and walked straight to the room where Sarah was resting, her body partially recovered after 3 days of proper medical care, yet her eyes still filled with caution every time Vincent appeared. She sat on the bed with her back against the headboard, while Lily slept beside her after an afternoon of play, and the moment Vincent entered, Sarah instinctively pulled the blanket higher over her daughter and looked at him with guarded eyes. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, but with unmistakable resolve. Vincent did not answer at once. He stepped closer to the bed and placed the DNA report in front of her. "Read it," he said, his voice low and unreadable. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then picked up the paper, her eyes moving over the lines and figures, once, twice, 3 times, as if unable to believe what she was seeing. 99.9%. Biological father-daughter relationship, Vincent Blackwell and Lily Holloway. The paper slipped from Sarah's fingers and her eyes flew open in horror as she looked at Vincent. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are the man from that night." Vincent nodded, his face expressionless, yet his dark eyes fixed steadily on hers. "Yes," he said, "I am the man from that night, and Lily is my daughter." It felt as though all the air had been torn from Sarah's lungs. For 6 years she had asked herself countless times who that man was, where he was, what kind of life he lived. She had imagined every possibility, a nameless office worker, a married man, someone long gone from Boston. But never once, not for a single moment, had she imagined that man would be Vincent Blackwell, the name whispered with fear on the streets, spoken in hushed tones in stories of the underworld, the most ruthless mafia boss in Boston described like a demon. "You are..." Sarah could not finish the sentence, her throat tightening painfully. "You are Vincent Blackwell, the Mafia boss. Vincent did not deny it. I am Vincent Blackwell, he said calmly as if discussing the weather. I control everything in Boston's underworld. I have killed. I have ordered killings. I have done things you could never imagine. But none of that changes the fact that Lily is my daughter, and I will not allow my child to live in hell for another day. Sierra shook her head as tears slid down her hollow cheeks. No, she said, her voice breaking yet resolute. I do not need your help. Lily and I survived without you for 6 years. We do not need you. Vincent looked at her, his gaze turning cold. Is that what you call surviving? He asked, his voice cutting like a blade. That damp 200-square-foot room. No food, no medicine, no money. A 5-year-old child begging on the street for coins to buy medicine for her mother. You call that living well? The words struck Sierra like a slap. Every sentence true, brutally so. A truth she had tried to soften with self-comfort, telling herself that at least she had Lily, at least they had each other. Yet the reality was that she had failed to protect her child, had allowed Lily to grow up in poverty and deprivation, in conditions no child should endure. I know who you are, Sarah said, her voice shaking but forcing strength into each word. I know you kill people. I know you deal in crime. I know you live in darkness. I do not want my daughter growing up in your world. I would rather she be poor than become part of that darkness. Vincent was silent for a long time, his eyes lowering to Lily's sleeping face, a small angelic expression unaware that her life was being decided by the two adults facing each other. Then he looked back at Sierra, and for the first time she saw something else in those cold eyes. Not cruelty, not threat, but a deep and aching pain. Do you think you have a choice? Vincent asked quietly. Do you think I am asking for your permission? Lily is my daughter, my blood, the sole heir of the Blackwell family. You may hate me, fear me, reject me, but you do not have the right to take my daughter away from me. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but Vincent cut her off. I am not threatening you, he said, his tone softening slightly. I am stating the truth. My world is dangerous. I know that, but in my world Lily will never be hungry, never be cold, never have to beg on the streets for money to buy medicine for her mother. You may stay here with her. I will not send you away. But whether you stay or leave, Lily will remain with me. Sarah looked at Vincent, into those dark eyes filled with unyielding determination, and she knew she could not fight this man. He was too powerful, too ruthless, too absolute. If she resisted, she would lose and might lose Lily forever. And at least if she stayed, she could protect her daughter from within. All right, Sarah said at last, her voice exhausted and hollow. I will stay, but only for Lily, not for you. Vincent nodded, his face still unreadable, yet in his dark eyes there was a flicker of something Sarah could not understand. I do not need you to stay for me, he replied. I only need you to stay for our daughter. That evening, after Sarah agreed to stay, Vincent ordered everything prepared to formally bring mother and child into the Blackwell estate, because although they had already been there for 3 days for Sarah's recovery, that had only been temporary, and now everything would change. And Vincent lifted Lily in his arms while she slept deeply, her body light as a dried leaf, her head resting against his shoulder, her steady, warm breath brushing his neck, stirring something unfamiliar inside him, a sensation he had never known in all his 37 years, the feeling of holding his own blood in his arms. Sarah walked beside him, her steps still slightly unsteady from a body not yet fully healed, yet she refused all help, her eyes never leaving her daughter for even a second. They descended the grand staircase of the estate, passed through the vast living room filled with antique paintings and priceless furnishings, whose value could have sustained Sarah and Lily for a lifetime, where Eleanor Byrne, the Blackwell family housekeeper for 30 years, waited at the foot of the stairs, a 60-year-old woman with silver hair neatly pinned back, posture perfectly straight, sharp eyes softened by quiet kindness, a woman who had served the Blackwells since Vincent was a boy, who had watched him grow into the cold and ruthless man he was today, and who was among the very few who knew that beneath the armor of ice, he still possessed a heart he had learned to hide too well. Sir, Eleanor said calmly, her gaze resting on Lily with rare tenderness. The rooms for the child and Miss Holloway are ready. Vincent nodded and said, Lead Miss Holloway to her room. I will take Lily to hers. Eleanor guided Sarah along the second-floor corridor past heavy oak doors and walls dressed in classic patterned wallpaper, and Sarah walked as if in a dream, unable to stop looking around, having only ever read about houses like this in books or seen them on screens. never imagining she would one day set foot in such a place. "This is your room," Eleanor said as she opened a door, and Sierra stepped inside and had to suppress a gasp, because the room was as large as the entire apartment where she and Lily had lived for 5 years, with a large double bed dressed in pristine white silk sheets, intricately carved oak wardrobes, a vanity with a gold-framed mirror, and tall windows overlooking a garden bursting with flowers, along with a private bathroom featuring a marble tub and every amenity Sierra had only ever dreamed of. She stood frozen, tears blurring her vision without her realizing when they had begun. "The child's room is right next door," Eleanor said gently, sensing Sierra's overwhelm. "Mr. Blackwell ordered it decorated according to a child's tastes. But if there is anything you wish to change, just tell me." Sierra nodded, unable to speak, and followed Eleanor to the next room where Vincent was laying Lily down on the bed. The room looked like a fairy tale world, pastel pink walls painted with butterflies and flowers, a princess bed draped in white lace, shelves filled with brand new books and toys, and a giant teddy bear, nearly half Lily's size, sitting in the corner as if greeting its new owner. Sierra looked at her daughter sleeping on the princess bed, the small angelic face peaceful in slumber, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks, because this was the first time in Lily's life she had a room of her own, a bed she did not have to share with her mother, new toys and books and all the things other children took for granted but her daughter had never had. Gratitude filled her, deep and aching, yet guilt followed close behind. Because she had not been able to give Lily these things, she had allowed her child to grow up in poverty for 5 years, and now the one giving her daughter everything was a mafia boss, a killer, a man who lived in darkness. And Sierra did not know whether she should feel joy or fear, gratitude or resentment. Vincent stood, stepped out of Lily's room, and stopped in front of Sierra as Eleanor discreetly vanished, leaving them alone in the silent corridor. "If you need anything, tell Eleanor," Vincent said in a low, emotionless voice. "I will have new clothes and necessities purchased for you and Lily. From now on, you will lack nothing." Sierra looked at him, her eyes still red from tears, and asked in a whisper why. "Why are you doing all this? You could take Lily and send me away. You have the power to do that. Why are you letting me stay?" Vincent was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes holding a depth she could not read, before he finally answered, "Because Lily needs her mother. I grew up without one. I know what that feels like, and I will not allow my daughter to endure that." He turned and walked away, leaving Sierra standing alone in the empty hallway, watching the back of the man whose face she had not known 6 years earlier, and who now held her life and her daughter's in his hands, uncertain of what the future would bring or what life inside Vincent Blackwell's world would become, knowing only that from this moment forward nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days after Sierra and Lily officially moved into the Blackwell estate, life for the mother and child began to slowly stabilize, Lily adapting with surprising ease as she ran through the vast house with bright, curious eyes, befriending Eleanor the housekeeper, and especially loving the swing in the garden that Vincent had ordered installed just for her, while Sierra remained cautious, making every effort to avoid Vincent whenever possible, seeing him only when absolutely necessary, and spending most of her time either in her room or by Lily's side. That morning, Vincent was having breakfast with Lily in the grand dining room, the little girl animatedly telling him about her dream from the night before, how she had flown on the back of a unicorn through clouds made of cotton candy and arrived at a castle built entirely of sweets. And Vincent listened, his dark eyes, usually cold as ice, softening in a way that felt almost unreal as he looked at his daughter, a faint smile even touching his lips. Sierra sat across from them, eating quietly and watching the two of them, her heart caught between relief at Lily's happiness and a vague, gnawing anxiety about the future. At that moment, the sound of a car engine roared at the gate. The guards, recognizing the future mistress's car, hesitated to stop her, allowing her to storm past the entrance. Moments later, the sound of high heels struck the stone floor before the dining room doors flew open and a woman swept in like a storm. Natasha Kensington, 32 years old, daughter of Victor Kensington, the second most powerful mafia boss in Boston, after the Blackwell family, dressed in an elegant white gown, her glossy brown hair styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless with lips red as blood, beautiful in the cold, razor-sharp way of a rose with thorns, fully aware that her beauty was her most lethal weapon. Natasha was Vincent's fiancée, the product of an arranged marriage meant to solidify the alliance between the two most powerful mafia families in the northeastern United States, and she had waited 3 years to become the mistress of the Blackwell Empire, with no intention of letting anyone steal that place from her. "Darling," Natasha said sweetly as she entered, explaining that she had come because Vincent had not answered his phone for days, and she had been worried, but her voice froze the instant her eyes took in the scene before her, Vincent having breakfast with a strange child, and beside them a thin, pale woman Natasha had never seen before. "Who are they?" Natasha demanded, her voice icy as her gaze swept over Sarah with undisguised contempt. "And who is this child? Why are they in your house?" Vincent set his coffee cup down, stood, and turned to face her, knowing this moment had been unavoidable. "Natasha, we need to talk," he said calmly. "No," Natasha cut him off, her voice rising. "You explain right now why there is a strange woman and a child in your home." Vincent took a deep breath and spoke with deliberate clarity. "Lily is my daughter. I found out only a few days ago, and she is Lily's mother." Natasha stood frozen as if struck by lightning, her face draining of color, eyes wide with disbelief. "Your daughter," she whispered, then suddenly laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "You must be joking. You had a child with this cheap whore." The words hit Sarah like a slap, instinct driving her to stand and step in front of Lily to shield her. "Lily, sweetheart, go play in the garden with Miss Eleanor," Sarah said, forcing calm into her voice despite her trembling hands. But Natasha was relentless, striding forward with fury blazing in her eyes, calling Sarah a whore who dared crawl into this house and steal her husband with a bastard child, mocking her appearance, her thin body, her poverty, asking how she dared believe she belonged there. Sarah bit her lip and endured it, long accustomed to humiliation. But when Natasha turned her contempt on Lily, sneering that the child was a bastard, and surely a lie meant to deceive Vincent, Sarah could remain silent no longer. "Do not speak about my daughter that way," she said, her voice shaking yet unyielding. "You may insult me, but you have no right to insult my child." Natasha stared at her in disbelief, enraged that someone she considered beneath her would dare answer back, hissing threats through clenched teeth as she raised her hand to strike Sarah. The blow never landed. Vincent moved like lightning, his hand clamping around Natasha's wrist mid-air, his eyes now ice-cold and lethal. Nothing like the tenderness she had once known. "Never," Vincent said slowly, each word heavy as a hammer. "Never touch them." Natasha yanked her hand back, her face twisted with pain and rage, screaming that he was choosing a whore and her bastard over her, reminding him she was Victor Kensington's daughter, his future wife, the mother of his legitimate children, demanding to know what Sarah was in comparison. "Lily is not a bastard," Vincent replied, his voice so cold it seemed to freeze the room. "Lily is my biological daughter, confirmed by DNA testing, and Sarah is the mother of my child, deserving of more respect than anyone in this room." Natasha staggered back, her face ashen, then asked in a broken voice what about her, what about the child she was carrying, because she too was pregnant with Vincent's child. The room fell into a suffocating silence, Sarah's heart tightening as she looked from Natasha to Vincent, while Vincent studied Natasha with an unreadable expression, before finally speaking that they would discuss that later, but for now she was to leave his house. Natasha stared at him in disbelief, whispering that he was throwing her out while she carried his child, and Vincent repeated the order without room for argument, telling her to leave immediately. Natasha looked once more at Vincent, at Sarah, at Lily hiding behind her mother with frightened eyes, then turned and fled the estate, her sobs echoing down the hallways. Sarah stood there, clutching Lily, her heart still racing, looking at the man who had just defended her against a powerful fiancé, unsure whether she felt gratitude or fear, relief or dread, because she knew that what had just happened was only the beginning, and that the true storm was still waiting ahead. But Natasha did not leave as Vincent ordered. She stopped at the threshold, her eyes bloodshot with rage and jealousy, her entire body trembling like a bomb about to explode. 3 years, she turned back and screamed. 3 years I waited for you. 3 years I endured your coldness. 3 years I prepared myself to be your wife. And now you tell me to get out because of a street whore and her bastard child. Sarah instinctively pulled Lily backward, sensing the danger flaring in Natasha's eyes, and Vincent stepped forward to stop her, but the unhinged woman was faster. She lunged at Sarah like a wild animal, both hands slamming into Sarah's chest and sending her stumbling backward. "Mama!" Lily screamed, letting go of her mother and running forward to help her. But in the chaos, the child's small foot caught on the leg of the table. She lost her balance and fell headfirst, her forehead striking the sharp corner of the marble table in the center of the living room. A dull, cracking sound echoed, followed by Sarah's piercing scream. "Lily!" Sarah cried, her voice tearing through the air as she rushed to her daughter, and what she saw made her heart stop. Blood. Blood pouring from Lily's forehead, dark and streaming, soaking into her golden hair and running down her small face contorted in pain. Lily screamed, her shrill cries filling the room, tiny hands clutching her head, fingers slick with blood. "My baby." Sarah gathered Lily into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably as her daughter's blood stained the white blouse she was wearing. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Vincent stood frozen for a heartbeat, his eyes locked on his bleeding daughter in her mother's arms. And then a fury he had never known in his life erupted like a volcano. He turned toward Natasha, who stood pale and shaking as she stared at the consequences of her actions. I did not mean to," Natasha stammered, backing toward the door. "I did not know the child would fall. I only—" Vincent advanced, each step heavy as lead, his eyes burning red. He seized Natasha's arm, gripping it so hard she screamed in pain. "You made my daughter bleed," Vincent said, his voice low and so cold the air seemed to freeze. "You dared to make my daughter bleed." "You are hurting me," Natasha sobbed, tears streaking down her perfectly made face. "I did not mean to. It was the child's fault. She fell on her own." Vincent shoved her away, sending her staggering. "This marriage is over," he declared, his voice leaving no room for negotiation or pleading. "From this moment on, you are no longer my fiancé. You will never be allowed to set foot in this house again, and if you ever dare come near my daughter or Sarah one more time, I do not care whose daughter you are. I will deal with you the way the Blackwell family deals with enemies." Natasha's eyes widened in terror. She knew Vincent's threats were never empty. "You cannot do this," she begged, through sobs. "My father will never forgive you. The alliance between our families will collapse. You will have enemies everywhere." "I do not care," Vincent replied coldly. "Now get out of my house." "Roman," he called sharply, "take her out. Do not let me see her face again." Roman appeared from the side entrance, grabbed Natasha's arm and dragged her out of the estate despite her screaming and begging, the doors slamming shut as her cries faded into silence. Vincent did not spare her another thought. He turned and rushed back to Sarah and Lily. "Give her to me," he said to Sarah, his voice still taut but softer now. "I will take her to the hospital." He lifted Lily into his arms, the child still sobbing as blood continued to flow from the wound on her forehead. Sarah ran after them to the car, climbing into the back seat beside Vincent and Lily, her hands never stopping as she stroked her daughter, her lips whispering reassurance even as her own voice shook with fear. The Maybach tore through the streets of Boston, Roman driving faster than ever before, running red lights and weaving through traffic like a black bullet. Inside the car, Vincent held his daughter tightly, one hand pressing a cloth to her wound to stem the bleeding, his eyes fixed on Lily's pain, stricken face as a fear he had never felt before rose in his chest. He had faced gunfire, stared death in the eye countless times, killed with his own hands without flinching. Yet now, seeing his daughter's blood, he was afraid. Afraid to the point his hands trembled, afraid until his heart ached as if crushed in a vice. "You will be all right," he whispered into Lily's ear, his voice rough. "Daddy is here. Daddy will never let anyone hurt you again. I promise." Lily looked up at Vincent through tears, her wide eyes filled with pain but also trust. "Daddy," she whispered, calling him father for the first time. "It hurts." "I know," Vincent answered, his voice breaking. "I know it hurts, but you are so brave. You are the bravest daughter Daddy has ever known." Sarah sat beside them, watching father and child, tears streaming down her face, not knowing what she felt more. The agony of seeing her daughter hurt, the terror of not knowing how serious the injury was, or the overwhelming emotion of seeing Vincent Blackwell, the most ruthless mafia boss in Boston, trembling with fear for a child. The car stopped at the gates of Massachusetts General Hospital, the finest hospital in Boston, where Vincent had called ahead so the medical team was already standing by, doctors and nurses rushing out the moment the Maybach came to a halt, placing Lily onto a gurney and wheeling her swiftly into the emergency room, while Vincent and Sarah ran after them, both faces pale with fear, Lily's blood still staining their clothes. The head of neurosurgery personally examined Lily's wound and informed them that the cut was fairly deep but thankfully had not affected the skull, that she would need stitches and overnight observation only, and Sarah released a shaky breath of relief, her legs nearly giving way as she stood in the hospital corridor. Vincent remained beside her, his eyes fixed on the procedure room door where doctors were stitching Lily's wound, silent but gripping his hands so tightly his knuckles turned white. Nearly an hour later, the door opened and the doctor stepped out to say everything was done, that Lily had been very brave and was now resting. Sarah and Vincent entered the room together and saw Lily lying on the hospital bed with a white bandage wrapped around her forehead, her small face slightly pale but far calmer now, her eyes closed as if asleep, yet when she heard footsteps, she opened them. "Mama," she called softly, her voice weak. "Daddy." Sarah rushed to the bedside, took her daughter's hand and kissed the small knuckles. "Mama is here. Mama is here, sweetheart. How do you feel?" "It hurts," Lily answered honestly. "But the doctor said I was very brave. I did not cry as much as he thought I would." Vincent moved to the other side of the bed, pulled up a chair, and gently brushed his daughter's hair with his large hand. "That is right," he said, his voice so tender it made Sarah turn to look at him. "You are the bravest. Daddy is very proud of you." Lily smiled faintly, her eyelids growing heavy with exhaustion. "Daddy will stay with me," she whispered. "I am scared." "Daddy is here," Vincent replied, taking her small hand and holding it firmly. "Daddy is not going anywhere. Sleep now. Daddy will watch over you." Lily closed her eyes, still uneasy and frightened by everything that had happened, stirring restlessly and opening her eyes from time to time to make sure her parents were still there. Vincent watched his daughter, and then he did something he had never done in his life before. He began to sing. His voice was low and rough, not polished like a professional singer's, but filled with a warmth and sincerity Sarah had never heard before. An old lullaby, the one his mother used to sing to him when he was small, before she died and left him alone in a cold and unforgiving world. Sarah stood by the window, silently watching Vincent sing to their daughter as the soft yellow hospital lights bathed his face. And in that moment he was no longer the ruthless Mafia boss, no longer the cold-blooded killer Boston feared. He was simply a father trying to lull his child to sleep, a man passing his mother's song on to the next generation. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks without her noticing as she watched Vincent, watched the rough hands once stained with enemy's blood now gently stroking their daughter's hair, watched the dark eyes once cold as ice now glowing with tenderness, and she realized she had been wrong. She had thought he was only darkness, only cruelty and danger, but now, seeing him sing softly to Lily in the quiet hospital room, she saw another man, a man with a heart, with pain, with love, a man forced by the world to become hard in order to survive, yet still carrying a deep longing to be loved. Lily fell into deep sleep, her breathing steady, her face peaceful, and Vincent stopped singing but did not let go of her hand, as if afraid she might disappear if he did. Sarah stepped closer and stood beside him, saying nothing, only resting her hand gently on his shoulder. Vincent looked up at her, his eyes in that moment no longer cold, but heavy with exhaustion and pain. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Thank you for giving birth to Lily. Thank you for raising her for 5 years. I know I have no right to say this, but thank you." Sarah did not answer. She only nodded softly, and the two of them stood together by their daughter's hospital bed through the night. For the first time, no longer strangers standing on opposite sides, but two people bound by the same fear, the same hope, and the same love for the small child sleeping peacefully before them. While Vincent and Sarah stood beside Lily's hospital bed, thousands of miles away, inside a luxurious villa hidden in the quiet outskirts of Paris, Marcus Thorne sat before a computer screen with a triumphant smile curling his lips. 6 years having passed since he vanished with $15 million from the Blackwell family. Yet he had never once stopped watching Vincent, maintaining his own people in Boston, silent eyes and ears feeding him every movement of his enemy, and what he had just learned felt almost too perfect to be real. Vincent Blackwell had a daughter, a flawless weakness. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the empty room, remembering how 6 years earlier he had fled like a rat, clutching money and secrets, living in constant fear that Vincent would find him, how he had tried to sell those secrets to Blackwell's enemies, only to find no one daring enough to buy them. Everyone knowing the price of angering Vincent, how he had lived rich but unable to enjoy it, free but never at peace, hating Vincent with a hatred carved into his bones. And now, at last, fortune had turned its face toward him. Marcus lifted his phone and dialed a familiar number, and on the other end, Victor Kensington, Natasha's father, answered after the second ring. "Mr. Kensington," Marcus said, his voice low and calculated, "I hear your daughter was humiliated and thrown out of Vincent's house. Would you like to hear a proposal?" Victor Kensington fell silent, a 60-year-old man with white hair and steel-gray eyes, the architect of the Kensington Mafia empire built from nothing, a man who never allowed anyone to disgrace his family, who had sworn vengeance the moment Natasha returned home in tears, yet who also knew that open war with the Blackwells was suicide. "Who are you?" Victor asked coldly. "Marcus Thorne," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Vincent's former financial advisor, the man who took his $15 million and disappeared. And now I have information you need to bring him down." After several seconds, Victor said simply, "Speak." Marcus smiled and said, "Vincent has a weakness no one in Boston knew about until last week. He has a 5-year-old daughter named Lily and a woman named Sarah, the child's mother. He cast your daughter aside because of them. He destroyed the alliance between our families because of them. And if we have them in our hands, we can force Vincent to do anything." "Kidnapping," Victor said, his voice unreadable. "You want me to kidnap a child and a woman. I want you to help me take back what Vincent stole from me," Marcus answered. "And I will help you reclaim your daughter's honor. We take Sarah and Lily. Force Vincent to sign over control of the Blackwell Empire, then drive him out of Boston forever. You become the most powerful man in the Northeast, and I take back what is mine." Victor considered it. The plan reckless and dangerous, yet the reward intoxicating. Revenge for Natasha, the removal of his greatest rival, total domination of Boston's underworld, and if it failed, he could always place all blame on Marcus. "Fine," Victor finally said, "but I do not trust you. You betrayed Vincent, and you could betray me just as easily. You will come to Boston and carry this out yourself, and if you dare cross me, I will hand you to Vincent and let him deal with you." Marcus laughed softly and said he would be in Boston within the week, telling Victor to prepare men and resources, that he already had people tracking Sarah and Lily's movements, and they would strike when the moment came. Then he ended the call, his eyes gleaming with a predator's thrill. 6 years of waiting, 6 years of hiding and hatred, and now at last his chance for revenge, because Vincent had stolen his peace, turned him into a fugitive, forced him to live like a rat in the shadows, and now he would steal from Vincent what mattered most, the daughter and the woman he loved. Meanwhile, in the Kensington estate, Natasha listened from behind the door, her eyes swollen from crying yet no longer filled with sorrow but with a burning hatred, caring nothing for how dangerous the plan was, wanting only to see Sarah and her bastard child suffer, to see Vincent on his knees begging, determined to involve herself directly and ensure that those who stole her happiness would pay dearly, unaware, all of them, that darkness was already closing in around the Blackwell estate, that enemies were silently advancing, and that the fragile peace Vincent had only just begun to build for his daughter was about to be violently threatened. 2 weeks after the incident with Natasha, the wound on Lily's forehead had healed, leaving only a faint scar that would fade with time, and life inside the Blackwell estate gradually settled into a fragile calm. Lily, adapting with surprising ease, growing accustomed to the vast house, and beginning to call Vincent Daddy naturally, while Sarah, though still keeping a careful distance from him, no longer looked at him with the same fear as before. Yet Vincent knew this peace could never last. He needed to formally introduce Lily to Boston's elite, to his business partners, and to the underworld he controlled. He needed to declare to everyone that Lily was his daughter, the sole heir of the Blackwell family, so no one would dare lay a hand on her, and so he decided to host a grand party at the estate. Sarah begged to stay home with Lily instead of attending, knowing she did not belong to that world, and that she would become the target of whispers and cruelty. But Vincent refused to yield, telling her she was Lily's mother and must stand beside her child, assuring her that he would not allow anyone to hurt her. That evening, the Blackwell estate blazed with light, luxury cars lining the gates, guests in glittering evening wear flowing inside like living flowers, while Sarah stood before the mirror in her room staring at the unfamiliar woman reflected back at her, dressed in a simple black gown chosen by Eleanor, her makeup soft, her hair neatly pinned, looking nothing like the gaunt, threadbare girl she had been weeks earlier, yet her eyes were unchanged, still carrying fear and uncertainty. Vincent came to escort her, dressed in a black 3-piece suit with a deep red tie, like a king stepping out of shadow, studying her for a long moment before nodding and telling her she looked beautiful, then offering his hand and telling her it was time. They descended the staircase together, Lily holding her father's hand on one side while Sarah walked on the other. And when they appeared at the top of the stairs overlooking the crowded living room, every gaze turned toward them, and a murmur rippled through the air like waves, Sarah feeling those looks filled with curiosity, contempt, and judgment, lowering her head to keep tears from spilling. Vincent led them to the center of the room and spoke, his voice carrying authority and command, introducing Lily Blackwell as his daughter and Sarah Holloway as Lily's mother, declaring that from this moment on they were members of the Blackwell family and demanding proper respect. The room falling silent before polite applause followed, though Sarah could sense the malice behind the forced smiles, and she did not have to wait long to see it revealed. When Vincent was called away to speak with key partners, Sarah stood alone near the table, trying to make herself invisible, but the socialites did not allow that, circling her like vultures with smiles on their lips and ice in their eyes, commenting sweetly that she was the woman who had borne Vincent a child, remarking that they had heard she once worked as a hotel cleaner and lived in the slums of South Boston, mocking her as a fairy tale Cinderella who already had a bastard child before meeting her prince, while Sarah bit her lip and endured, gripping her glass so tightly her fingers turned white, knowing any response would only give them more weapons. Then a familiar voice rose behind her, cold and venomous, as Natasha stepped forward in a dress red as blood, lips curved in a cruel smile, telling the others not to be so hard on Sarah, dismissing her as a lucky whore who slept with the right man at the right time, sneering as she asked how much one night with Vincent had paid, or whether Sarah had done it for free and kept the child as a lottery ticket. The words struck Sarah like a blow to the chest, tears threatening as she forced them back, reminding herself of the hunger and cold, the nights locked in dark basements, the stolen wages and humiliations she had survived, refusing to collapse now, telling Natasha quietly but firmly that she had no right to judge her. Natasha laughed and replied that she did not need to know Sarah, only that she was unwanted, an orphan abandoned in a trash bin and raised in an orphanage like a stray dog, daring to stand in this house beside the man who once belonged to her, and the words hit Sarah like lightning, leaving her exposed and trembling, every buried shame laid bare, her legs weakening as she longed to flee back to her tiny 200-square-foot room and disappear forever. But then, a hand closed around hers, warm and steady, and she looked up to see Vincent at her side, his eyes fixed on Natasha with lethal cold as he reminded her that she was not permitted in his home, pulling Sarah against him, and standing before her like a shield, declaring to the silent room that Sarah belonged wherever he decided she belonged, that she was the mother of his daughter, and that any insult toward her or Lily was an insult to the Blackwell family, warning that anyone who dared speak another word against them would become his enemy. The room sank into heavy silence as Natasha trembled and fled the party, the other women scattering in fear, and Sarah stood there with her hand still in Vincent's, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the man who defended her before the entire world, her heart stirring with a feeling she could not yet name. 1 week after the party, life seemed to return to something resembling normalcy. Vincent consumed by business and clandestine meetings with members of his organization, while Sarah devoted her days to caring for Lily and slowly adjusting to her new reality, still not entirely comfortable within the walls of such luxury, yet finding everything worthwhile when she saw her daughter healthy and smiling. That morning Lily begged her mother to take her to Boston Common, a place Eleanor had described as filled with ducks on the pond and friendly squirrels. And when Sarah asked Vincent, he agreed but insisted that 2 bodyguards accompany them, a condition Sarah no longer protested, having grown used to never being alone since moving into the Blackwell estate. Boston Common was beautiful in the morning, golden sunlight filtering through the trees, birdsong filling the air, other families strolling with their children, and Lily ran freely, chasing ducks by the water, her clear laughter echoing and making Sarah smile without realizing it, because for the first time in 5 years she was watching her daughter truly happy like a normal child, no longer worried about the next meal, no longer afraid inside a damp and dark room. Sarah sat on a stone bench while the 2 bodyguards stood several meters away, their eyes fixed on Lily, who was crouched by the pond feeding ducks pieces of bread Eleanor had packed, and Sarah turned away for just a second to reach into her bag for a bottle of water, but when she looked up again her heart stopped. Lily was gone. Sarah leapt to her feet, scanning the area frantically, but there was no sign of her daughter. "Lily," she called, her voice beginning to shake. "Lily, where are you?" Yet no answer came, and the bodyguards rushed in immediately, splitting up to search the park, but Lily seemed to have vanished into thin air. Sarah ran wildly, screaming her daughter's name as tears streamed down her face. "Lily, where are you? Mama is here." But only silence answered her. Then her phone vibrated in her bag, and she snatched it up with trembling hands, hoping against hope it was news of Lily. But an unfamiliar number filled the screen, and she answered. "Mrs. Holloway," a man's voice said, low and cold. "Stop screaming uselessly. Your daughter is with me." The words struck Sarah like a blow to the chest, her legs giving way as she collapsed onto the ground. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice choking with terror. "What do you want, please? Do not hurt my child." "I am Marcus Thorne," the voice replied with unmistakable triumph. "And you do not need to know who I am. You only need to call Vincent and tell him that if he wants to see his daughter again, he must come alone to warehouse number 12 on Dorchester Street at 8 o'clock tonight. Alone. No weapons, no police, no men. And if I see anyone else besides him, the girl dies. Do you understand?" Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, unable to speak, nodding even though she knew he could not see her, before finally forcing out a broken, "Yes, please. Do not hurt my child." And Marcus laughed softly, saying that depended on Vincent, before ending the call. Sarah sat there in the middle of the park, the phone still pressed to her ear long after the line went dead, her body shaking beyond control, and one of the bodyguards rushed to her, taking in her ashen face and immediately knowing something was terribly wrong. "Mrs. Holloway, what happened?" he demanded, and she answered through sobs that Lily had been kidnapped, telling him to call Vincent, right now, immediately. 20 minutes later, Vincent arrived at the park, his face carved from stone, his dark eyes burning with a fury Sarah had never seen before, and he listened as she recounted the call, every word and every threat, his fists tightening with each sentence until his knuckles turned white. "Marcus Thorne," Vincent murmured, his voice hissing like a venomous serpent. "So he has finally shown himself." He turned to Roman, his gaze icy. "Prepare the men. Set up around warehouse number 12 on Dorchester Street. But no one acts until I give the order. I will go in alone." "You cannot go alone," Roman protested. "It is a trap." "I know it is a trap," Vincent replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But my daughter is in there." He turned back to Sarah, who was crying uncontrollably, and for the first time he rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I will bring Lily back," he said, his voice still cold yet filled with absolute certainty. "I promise you." That night, precisely at 8 o'clock, Vincent Blackwell stepped alone into the abandoned warehouse on Dorchester Street, and the darkness swallowed him whole like a beast waiting for its prey. The abandoned warehouse lay drowned in suffocating darkness, the stench of damp concrete and rust filling Vincent's lungs as he stepped through the corroded metal door, weak light spilling from a few bare bulbs dangling overhead, just enough to reveal the sight that felt as though someone had wrapped a fist around his heart and squeezed. Lily sat on a wooden chair in the center of the warehouse, her wrists and ankles tightly bound, duct tape sealed across her mouth, her wide eyes flooded with tears as they fixed on him in pure terror. Around her stood more than a dozen of Marcus's gunmen, every weapon trained on Vincent, and directly behind Lily, wearing a victorious smile, stood Marcus Thorne, the traitor Vincent had hunted for 6 long years. "Vincent Blackwell," Marcus called out, his voice thick with pleasure. "So the greatest mafia boss in Boston finally comes alone, unarmed, without his men, all for a 5-year-old child. Who would have thought this day would come?" Vincent did not answer, his gaze locked on Lily, trying to pour calm into her through his eyes alone, silently promising her he would take her home. "Let her go," Vincent said at last, his voice low and dangerous. "Whatever is between you and me has nothing to do with her." Marcus laughed. "Nothing to do with her," he mocked. "Do you know how I have lived these past 6 years? Like a rat, running from place to place, afraid to return home, afraid to touch the money I took, because I knew you would hunt me down. You stole my life. And now I will steal what matters most to you." He drew his gun and pressed it against Lily's head, her small body trembling as muffled sobs escaped behind the tape, and Vincent felt as though his heart had been plunged into boiling oil. "What do you want?" Vincent asked, his voice steady despite the chaos raging inside him. "Money, power, everything," Marcus replied. "You will sign over the entire Blackwell empire to me. You will leave Boston and never return, and this child stays with me as leverage to make sure you do not break your word." Vincent looked at Marcus, then at Lily, then quickly scanned the warehouse. 14 gunmen, he counted. 4 at the rear door, 6 along the sides, 4 at the front, Marcus positioned behind Lily using her as a shield, a situation that bordered on impossible. But Vincent had not truly come alone. "Fine," Vincent said, his calm almost unsettling. "I will sign, bring the documents." Marcus frowned, not expecting such immediate surrender, and signaled for one of his men to bring over a thick folder and place it on the battered wooden table. Vincent stepped forward, took the pen, and just as he was about to sign, he lifted his eyes to Marcus with a smile colder than ice. "Do you know why I let you live these 6 years?" Vincent asked, his voice dropping into something lethal. "Because I wanted to deal with you myself, and today is that day." Instantly the lights cut out, and darkness swallowed everything whole, gunfire exploding from every direction, screams ringing out as bodies hit the concrete. Roman and his team already in position, having waited for Vincent's signal. In the chaos, Vincent moved like a phantom, charging toward Lily with the speed of a predator forged in darkness. Marcus's shouted orders and the crack of gunshots fading into irrelevance because Vincent had only one objective: to pull his daughter out of hell. He reached Lily, tore through the ropes and tape in seconds, wrapped her in his arms, and rolled aside just as a bullet tore through the space they had occupied. Lily screamed, her tiny hands clutching Vincent's neck as if she might be torn away again. "Daddy," she cried through the gunfire. "I'm scared." "I'm here," Vincent whispered hoarsely into her ear. "Close your eyes and cover your ears. Do not open them until I tell you to." He placed Lily behind a stack of wooden crates, shielding her with his body, then drew the gun Roman had hidden for him earlier. The fight was swift and brutal. Marcus's men no match for the soldiers Vincent had trained for years. One by one they fell, the gunfire thinning until only a single figure remained, fleeing toward the rear exit, Marcus Thorne. Vincent pursued him like a black panther and fired once, the bullet shattering Marcus's leg and sending him crashing onto the cold concrete. Marcus rolled over, his face twisted with pain and terror, his gun shaking as he aimed it uselessly at Vincent. "You can't kill me, Vincent," Marcus screamed, his voice breaking. "I know too many of your secrets. If I die, everything will be exposed." Vincent did not slow. He kicked the gun from Marcus's hand and aimed his own weapon straight at the traitor's head. "You touched my daughter," Vincent said, his voice colder than hell itself. "That was your final mistake." A single shot echoed through the warehouse, and Marcus Thorne lay still on the floor, his eyes frozen wide in terror. Vincent stood for a heartbeat, staring down at his fallen enemy, then dropped the gun and ran back to Lily. She was curled behind the crates, hands clamped over her ears, eyes squeezed shut, her whole body shaking. Vincent knelt beside her and gently lowered her hands. "Baby, Daddy's here," he said, his voice breaking. "It's over. You're safe." Lily opened her eyes, saw him, and threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably, her small body clinging to him, as though letting go meant losing him forever. Vincent held her tight, crushing her to his chest, and in that moment the most ruthless mafia boss in Boston finally understood what true fear of loss felt like. A terror worse than death itself, more painful than any bullet. "I'm sorry," Vincent whispered into his daughter's hair, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I promise. I promise I will never let anyone hurt you again. Never." Roman approached and stopped short when he saw his boss kneeling on the concrete floor, trembling as he held his child. And in 15 years of loyalty, it was the first time Roman had ever seen Vincent Blackwell shake. After the night of terror at the warehouse, Vincent brought Lily back to the estate and did not leave her side for the entire night, while Sarah held her daughter and cried until she was utterly exhausted, thanking heaven, fate, and Vincent himself for bringing Lily home safely. And although the doctor confirmed that Lily had suffered no physical injuries, it was clear the child had been deeply traumatized, clinging to her parents every moment, screaming at the sight of darkness, waking from nightmares night after night in panic, calling out for her mother and father. And Vincent hired the best child psychologist in Boston, yet he understood that what his daughter needed most was not treatment but presence. And so for the first time in his life, Vincent Blackwell neglected his empire, handed all business over to Roman, and devoted himself entirely to his child. While Vincent stayed by Lily's side, Roman investigated the kidnapping and uncovered truths that ignited a fury Vincent could barely contain, discovering that Marcus Thorne had not acted alone, and that his accomplice had been Natasha Kensington, with evidence from Marcus's phone revealing that Natasha had provided Lily and Sierra's schedules, helped plan the abduction in detail, and promised to secure her father's support once the plan succeeded. But what shocked Vincent even more were messages proving that Natasha had never been pregnant at all, that it had been a calculated lie to trap him into marriage and pressure him into submission, even discussing with Marcus how she would later pretend to miscarry after becoming his official wife. And Vincent read those messages in silence, his face cold as ice while his eyes burned with restrained rage. He ordered Roman to confront Victor Kensington with all evidence of Natasha's involvement in the kidnapping of the Blackwell heir, a crime unforgivable even in the underworld. And Victor, though a father, was first and foremost a Mafia boss, who understood the rules, knowing that protecting Natasha would mean war he would lose, since no one would stand with him after such a transgression. And so he made a brutal decision, surrendering his daughter to the police, on charges of conspiracy to kidnap a child in exchange for peace with the Blackwell family and the survival of the Kensington Empire. And Natasha was arrested amid screams and curses directed at Vincent, Sarah, and even her own father, yet no one listened, and she now faced many years in prison, emerging one day with nothing, no family, no power, no wealth, nothing at all. When Sarah learned of Natasha's arrest, she felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, only exhaustion from the endless fear and turmoil, but also a quiet sense of relief, as though a crushing weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, life at the Blackwell estate slowly returned to calm, Lily still afraid of the dark and occasionally haunted by nightmares, yet gradually healing with patience, therapy, and the constant presence of her parents, while Vincent spent every evening reading stories to her, singing her to sleep, lying beside her until she drifted off, learning to make pancakes that burned more often than not, learning to braid her hair with clumsy, calloused hands that made Lily laugh out loud. And in the midst of it all, something unexpected began to grow. Vincent and Sarah, once strangers bound together only by circumstance and a child, began to find a quiet harmony, caring for Lily together, worrying together, celebrating together, talking more and more, at first only about their daughter, and then about everything else. As Sarah shared her childhood in the orphanage, the years of hunger and wandering, the nights she held Lily and cried, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, and Vincent listened, then told her about his own past, the mother who died when he was 10, the ruthless father who forced him into inheritance while still a boy, the lonely nights in this vast estate, when he himself had been a child abandoned among riches, and though their lives had been different, their loneliness was the same, both growing up unloved, both fighting alone to survive, both yearning for a real family, yet never daring to admit it. One night, with Lily asleep, Vincent and Sarah sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights of Boston. Stars scattered across the sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers from the garden below, and Sarah spoke softly, thanking him for everything he had done for Lily and for her. And Vincent turned to look at her, moonlight illuminating her face, and he realized that what moved him was not her beauty but her strength, her resilience, her tenderness, and her boundless love for their child. And he answered that he was the one who should be grateful, because she had given him Lily, she had given him a family, something he had never known. And as Sarah looked at him with tears shining in her eyes, neither of them knew who moved first, only that their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss, like two lonely souls finally finding each other in the dark. And when they pulled apart, they said nothing, yet the silence between them was filled with understanding, acceptance, and a love quietly beginning to rise from the ashes of their painful past. 6 months after that first kiss on the balcony, Vincent took Sarah and Lily to a private island in the Caribbean, where he owned a small, secluded resort, nestled between turquoise waters, white sand, and rows of palm trees whispering in the breeze. And Lily ran joyfully along the beach, building sandcastles and chasing tiny crabs, her clear laughter echoing freely as she played, fully healed from the trauma she once carried, no longer afraid of the dark, no longer haunted by nightmares, now simply a happy little princess wrapped in her parents' love. That afternoon, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in vivid shades of orange and pink, Vincent led Sarah down the beach, Lily skipping behind them with a wildflower clutched proudly in her hand, and Sarah followed without knowing what he planned, guided only by the trust she had built in him after everything they had survived together. When they reached a quiet stretch of sand where a small table waited, adorned with fresh flowers and softly glowing candles, Sarah stopped in astonishment, and before she could speak, Vincent lowered himself onto one knee in the sand, taking her hand in his dark eyes locked onto hers with unguarded sincerity and love, and he spoke her name softly, telling her that he knew he was not a perfect man, that he carried a dark past, blood on his hands, and a world filled with danger around him, that he could not promise her the peaceful life of ordinary people, but that he could promise to love her and Lily with everything he had, to protect them with his life, and to spend the rest of his years making up for the 6 years he had been absent. He drew a red velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a diamond ring shimmering in the fading light. And when he asked her if she would become his wife, His voice trembled slightly, and for the first time, Sarah saw the most powerful mafia boss in Boston openly nervous. She looked down at the man kneeling before her, the man she had once feared and resented, the man who had saved her daughter, protected her, given her a home and a family, and tears streamed down her face, these tears born not of pain but of happiness, as she whispered yes, that she would be his wife. And Vincent rose, slipped the ring onto her finger, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her beneath the blazing sunset, while Lily ran to them, hugging their legs and shouting with delight that her parents were getting married and asking if she would have a little sibling. They laughed together, their joy carried on the wind and waves like a song of fulfillment, and 1 month later they were married at the Blackwell estate in a ceremony that was simple yet warm and filled with love, Sarah walking down the aisle in a pure white gown holding lilies with Lily as her flower girl, Vincent waiting at the end in a black 3-piece suit like a king welcoming his queen, and as they exchanged vows and rings and kissed before their guests, Sarah knew her life had truly transformed, from hell to heaven, from loneliness to happiness, from having nothing to having everything. 1 year after the wedding, Sarah gave birth to a handsome baby boy they named Lucas Blackwell, and Lily, now 6, was overjoyed to be a big sister, insisting on helping her mother, reading stories to her baby brother even though he could not yet understand, and promising to protect him just as her father had protected her. While Vincent looked at his family, his wife holding their newborn son, and his daughter curled beside them, and felt a peace he had never known in all his 38 years. Still a mafia boss, still ruling the Boston underworld, yet slowly stepping away from violence toward legitimate business, with Roman as his trusted right hand so he could devote more time to his family. With Vincent's support, Sarah opened a charitable center called House of Hope to help single mothers and orphaned children like she once was, never forgetting the hunger, the nights on the street, the humiliation and exploitation, and wanting to use what she now had to help others survive what she once endured, with her closest friend Margot becoming the center's manager, finally finding stability and purpose, their friendship as strong as ever. One spring morning in the Blackwell estate, Sarah awoke beside Vincent as sunlight streamed through the curtains, Lily bursting into the room demanding breakfast, Lucas crying softly in his cradle, and Sarah looked around at the luxurious yet warm bedroom, at the man lifting their daughter onto his shoulders, at her baby son stirring nearby, remembering the damp 200-square-foot room of her past, the hunger, the despair, and the night 6 years ago that changed everything, realizing that sometimes life takes us through hell so we can recognize heaven when we finally arrive, and she smiled, kissing Vincent and Lily before lifting Lucas into her arms, knowing her family, her happiness, was finally complete, and that whatever the future held they would face it together, because they had found each other in the dark and built their love from the strongest things of all, understanding, sacrifice, and trust. The story of Vincent and Sarah has reached its end, but its lesson remains. Never give up hope. No matter how deeply life pushes you into darkness, love can bloom in the most unexpected places between imperfect people. Everyone deserves a second chance, no matter how dark their past, and family, love, and companionship are the greatest treasures of all. Not money or power, but those who stand by you when you have nothing. If you have followed this story to the end, please subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can continue bringing you meaningful and moving stories every day, and tell us how this story made you feel, whether it reminded you of something in your own life, whether you believe everyone deserves a second chance. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear from the depths of your heart, and we wish everyone watching good health, peace, joy, and happiness each day. Keep faith in life and cherish those you love. Goodbye for now, and see you again in the next video.